Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you today to this special session on the theme of Eurasia, history, geopolitics, and international relations, organized by the Tillotoma Foundation. Tillotoma Foundation is a global think tank working in the areas of international relations, diplomacy, area studies, gender, environmental, financial, scientific, strategic, and defense policy. I'm Kamakshi Wason, Global Chief Operating Officer and Director of Academic Programs at the Tillotoma Foundation. Let me especially thank Mr. Somdas, Chairperson Director of the Tillotoma Foundation, for his constant support and encouragement in curating this session. We at the Tillotoma Foundation put a lot of emphasis on inclusivity, gender equality, and being impartial in our approach. The Eurasian region has been a crucial focus area of the foundation. Over the years, the foundation has actively cooperated with and worked with institutions, senior experts, and diplomats from the Eurasian region. Several track to diplomatic conclaves, international seminars with high-level participation, and lectures series has been organized. I'm pleased to welcome our distinguished speaker for today, Professor Ayse Zarakol. She is a professor of international relations at the University of Cambridge and a politics fellow at Emmanuel College. She is the author of the book, After Defeat, How the East Learned to Live with the West, which deals with international stigmatization and the integration of defeated non-Western powers, that is Turkey after World War I, Japan after World War II, and Russia after the Cold War, into the international system. Her latest book is titled Before the West, The Rise and Fall of Eastern World Orders. It has a lot of focus on the Mongol Empire and its legacy in terms of sovereignty norms and world order in Asia. A book that I personally found most fascinating. Being a senior academic in the field of international relations, Professor Zarakol is an associate director of the academic journal, International Organization, and also sits on the editorial board of multiple other academic journals. Her research interest lies in examining the intersection of history and international relations, particularly focusing on Eurasia. It is such a pleasure to have you here with us today, Professor Zarakol. Today's theme, Eurasia, history, geopolitics, and international relations, holds great importance in the current global context. It provides us with the opportunity to delve into the rich historical, cultural, and political dynamics of the Eurasian region and understand how it shapes global affairs and influences the international relations. Moreover, this special session allows us to examine the geopolitical complexities and evolving power dynamics in Eurasia, shedding light on the strategic interests of key players and the implications for global stability and security. Furthermore, this session enables us to analyze the interplay between historical events and the present-day geopolitical realities in Eurasia. With this, there are some important questions that we aim to explore and address in this session. These questions include, question number 1, how has the historical legacy of Eurasia shaped its current geopolitical landscape? Question 2, what are the key drivers of power and influence in Eurasia today? Question number 3, what are the potential implications of geopolitical developments in Eurasia for global diplomacy and international relations? How can a comprehensive understanding of Eurasia's history, geopolitics, and international relations contribute to effective diplomacy and global cooperation? What are the challenges and opportunities for regional cooperation in Eurasia, say in the domains of connectivity, trade, economic integration, energy, climate change, people-to-people ties, etc.? I'm certain our noted speaker for today would enlighten us further on the complexities of Eurasia's political and social history, geopolitics, and international relations. Thank you, Professor Zarakol, for being here today at the Tillotoma Foundation and sharing your insights on this interesting topic. I would now like to request Professor Zarakol to start with her talk. Over to you, Professor Zarakol.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What I plan to do is to talk about the book and what I was trying to accomplish in the book and some of the main arguments. And then hopefully in the Q&A, we can come to, the book is primarily historical, but it has implications for the present day issues that Kamakshi raised. And maybe in the Q&A, we can come to some of the more contemporary implications of the argument in the book. So as was said, the book is called Before the West, The Rise and Fall of Eastern World Orders. It came out March 2022 with Cambridge University Press. And since then, I've been talking to global audiences and hopefully convincing them that there is actually a lot in Eurasian history that has been forgotten and is important to recover and remember. My primary field is international relations, and this book came out of my general dissatisfaction with the way history is taught in international relations, the field. I mean, this is true, definitely, in the US and UK and, other contexts I'm familiar with, but because international relations as a discipline comes out of, US academia, I think it's true globally, the way it's taught falls into a particular template. So if you open international relations textbooks as a university student, you might encounter some discussion of the Peloponnesian War, from ancient Greece. That's supposed to give us guidance about, what's happening between, US and China now, like Athens and Sparta, right? That's a common analogy. And then most textbooks will jump to 1648, to Peace of Westphalia, which was a set of treaties that concluded the 30 Years' War in Europe. And textbooks will tell you this is when the modern international order was created. And then there will be a number of other events that are name-checked, Congress of Vienna after the Napoleonic Wars, and World War I, World War II, and of the Cold War. But this is kind of the template or scheme that my field, international relations, operates with in terms of what is important in world history. And in fact, our international order now, some people will refer to it sometimes as the Westphalian order. The nation state sometimes is called the Westphalian state, right? These are the critical moments. Not that Westphalia isn't important, but students, when they get this history, because nothing is said about this big chunk of time between ancient Greece and Westphalia. I mean, we're talking about 2,000 years. Students, I think, assume nothing important really happened that can tell us anything about international relations now or had any impact on international relations now. Also, the history is very Eurocentric, as you can see. It's very silent about other parts of the world. In fact, the rest of the world does not even come into the view until, until maybe 18th, 19th century, and only then as like a site of colonialism and imperialism for European powers, as if nothing, again, happened elsewhere. So if you're studying international order, for those of us who are interested in the crisis of the contemporary international order, we look at the history of international order. But that history, again, because it's based on this limited view of what matters in world history, it goes something like this, right? There was no order anywhere, and then European actors created order in Europe in 17th century, and then they exported that order to the rest of the world. And of course, there have been criticisms of this account from post-colonial scholarship or critical scholarship, but that scholarship often also assumes the same narrative. It's just critical of it, that order came from Europe, but it was coercive rather than benevolent. But the general account remains the same. So this traditional understanding of history, I think, leads us to conclude, when we think about other parts of the world, that other parts of the world were in silos, and they were disconnected from each other, as if there was always an India or like a China or Turkey or East Asia or Central Asia. So our modern day divisions, national or regional divisions, have always existed, and that's just like the natural state of things. And the connections between our different parts of the world have not been made until 18th, 19th century, until European actors connected different parts of the world. So that is the account that I want to challenge in this book. And why does it matter? Because, why does it matter to have a better understanding of history and Eurasia and Asia? Because our modern day arguments about what's happening, whether we're talking about Russia and Ukraine, or we're talking about the rise of China, for instance, they are based on historical examples. So somebody like, maybe you've seen John Mearsheimer. He's an American IR scholar who's very much in the news, critical of US policy and somewhat sympathetic towards Russia in the war on Ukraine. But his arguments are all based on his studies of history and great power behavior. Or if we talk about the Thucydides trap, this is supposed to be the power transition between China and the US, and people predicting conflict. Again, they are doing that by studying history, the Peloponnesian War. But if you only have, 3 cases from history to study, you can only draw so many conclusions. That's why we need to broaden, even for people who don't care about Asian history or Eurasian history, it's important that they become familiar with it and don't make false assumptions about it, because then maybe we have a bigger universe of cases we can think with about if we're trying to figure out what is happening today. So in this book, in Before the West, that's what I'm trying to do, try to create a new history of international relations. Of course, you will say, I think somebody from this audience might say, why did you write about the time period you're writing about? Or why did you write about, the Mongols rather than, of course, the history of, for instance, the Indian subcontinent is very rich, and there, I could have gone further back in time, and I could have written about other periods, and that criticism would be right. I mean, the book is limited in a way, but I'm only one person, so I can only write so much. There are other periods of history that are also important and that need to be recovered as well. So I have no problem with that. In the book, I start with the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. The reason I do that is not because I'm a Mongol apologist or I'm trying to promote the Mongol Empire. Although, I mean, we need to have a fair view of what that empire was. But the reason why I started there is because it's a moment of convergence for Asia or Eurasia. By the way, I keep saying Asia or Eurasia because the terms themselves have issues. The terms themselves are Eurocentric, and then they have their own politics and history. So I'm a bit agnostic about which term to use, but essentially this map captures much of it, right? This area that you can see in this map, the geographic area, is what I'm focused on. And the Mongol Empire in the 13th century unifies much of that space. Not all of it, but much of it. And in that sense, I argue, the Mongol Empire is to Asian history what the Roman Empire is to European history. All right, it's a moment where most of the people in this space, again, not all, but most of the people in this space come under the rule of the same families, the same person, the same family. And even those who don't come under the direct rule of the empire are very much affected by this development, because there are, refugees and people flows, and for instance, to the subcontinent and elsewhere, right? So everybody's affected by this development. So that's a good place to start, I think, if you want to write a non-Eurocentric history of Asia, as I did, that did not focus on one country or one region, but wanted to tell a story of connectedness and shared experiences. And that's what I'm trying to do in the book. And I argue that the Mongol Empire, or as I call it, the Empire of Genghis Khan, unified this space and disseminated in this space institutions, practices, people, right? It's a moment of connectivity. And that I argue is is an ordering moment. The empire creates a world order in a way. I mean, of course, it's not a world order in the sense that it doesn't cover all of the world. There are the Americas, but they don't know the Americas exist, right? So it covers much of the known world. It has ambitions to cover the world. So it's a world order. And we know it's a world order because there are people traveling in this space. Everybody knows Marco Polo, but I discuss in the book also somebody like Ibn Battuta, who was a traveler who started his life in Western North Africa, and then, for many decades traveled in this Asian space. And that's important or interesting for our purposes, is because, he wrote his memoirs when he went back to his hometown. And you can read them now, they are available, at least in English. And one is, if you read the memoirs, you are struck by the fact that it is relatively easy for him to travel. He goes from city to city. He's employed as a jurist. He's an elite of this world. He has benefactors. But this type of travel, where your social credentials translate as you go from one place to the other, it's not possible in a disconnected world. Only in a globalized, connected world that has been ordered by some of the same institutions and principles is that possible. I mean, the example is I give in the book is myself. I grew up in Turkey, and then I went to the US, then now I live in the UK. I travel all around the world. I give talks. Nobody finds this strange, and pretty much everybody I interact with, my interactions are predictable. I'm not shocking to the audiences that I interact with, and they're not shocking to me, because our world is globalized and we share so much in common in terms of what we expect our day-to-day life to be, what we expect academic environments or think tank environments to be, right? There are all of that is possible because we live in the same international order that's been made by European modernity. So the argument is that in the 13th century, the Mongol Empire did something similar to Asia and beyond. And that's where I start there. That order is underwritten by shared materials and goods. A good example is the dumpling. Now, well, you have the samosa, but even today, I mean, this is a little bit like a joke, but I think it illustrates what I'm trying to get at. Even today, what is called the dumpling, or it has different names in different places, but this food item, where it's most enjoyed, maps quite closely to the Mongol Empire because it was disseminated. It's not, I don't know who invented it, but the Mongols disseminated this delicious food item around Asia, among other things. I mean, many other things as well. But in the book, of course, I'm not interested in food items or art or technology. What I'm interested in are political institutions, what they disseminated. And the argument is that a particular type of rule, a particular type of governance that the Mongols practiced, again, they did not invent it. It has a much longer history. But they reintroduced it, let's say, because the empire was so successful for a century or so. They reintroduced a particular understanding of sovereignty to this space, which I call Chingizid sovereignty, after Genghis Khan. And this particular understanding of sovereignty was rule, kingship, you could also say, was so influential in this space after the Mongols that we can trace it for decades, for centuries, like its impact. You can see this institution and other secondary institutions that went along with it in this original area covered by the empire, but then you can also see it in places that were conquered by the successors to the Mongols. So what do we mean by that? What is this particular understanding of sovereignty? It's about extreme centralization of authority in the person of the ruler. So the ruler is the lawgiver. He has all authority, doesn't share that authority with anybody, not with religion or anybody else, in theory at least, not accountable to anyone, kind of like a god on earth in a way. And that idea that one person should have all the power is legitimated, justified by the fact that that person is a world conqueror. So in this model, in this understanding of sovereignty, centralization of power goes hand in hand with conquest. So the ruler has to be a world conqueror, has to have a world empire. And that's the kind of model that we see both with the Mongols and their successors that were influenced by that model, even though over time, the model intersected with other practices and became hybridized. It changed, evolved over time a bit. So that I argue, I mean, maybe this is more interesting for an international relations scholarly audience, but I argue that because the Mongols and their successors were operating with these world empire ambitions, they are similar to the great powers of our time and therefore comparable in many ways to modern international relations powers. So the book looks at three periods or three world orders. The first one is the original world order that I just discussed briefly. So the world empire of Genghis Khan. So that's middle of 13th century to 14th century. And in the beginning, there's one empire, but then that breaks into four pieces, which creates a problem, of course, because, as I said, they are also, you cannot have four world empires. There can only be one world empire, one universal empire. So that creates legitimation problems, which we can discuss in the Q&A. But that's partly why the Mongols, the successors of Genghis Khan, end up converting to religions, Islam in the West, Buddhism in the East. But again, just looking at this map, I think it's quite remarkable. Most people don't realize that there was a moment, in the 14th century, what we call present-day, China, present-day Russia, present-day Middle East. They're all functioning according to the same logic with similar institutions, even though they now have, different names in the historiography of these regions. Right, this is a moment. They were the same. It was the same order, same kind of units. Then next chapter looks at, so that world order fragments for reasons which we can discuss. And then it's replaced by another world order that is still similar in the sense that, we have the 19th century European imperial order, which then gives way to the 20th century interwar order. And those are different things, but there's still continuity, right? There are still norms and institutions that continue from one period to the other. So there is a similar continuity here, even though the Mongols are no longer dominant, and we have other great houses that are now powerful. These new great houses are influenced by the same understanding of sovereignty. So they are also interested in creating world empires. So the Timurid Empire, end of 14th century and early part of 15th century, very clearly modeled on the Mongol model. Timur Lane, he wanted to conquer China. He modeled himself after Genghis Khan. So very easy to see in his case. But the Ming, the early Ming, in China, the Ming dynasty, they were not, they toppled the Yuan dynasty. They were anti-Mongol. They returned to pre-Mongol practices in some ways. But in the early period of the Ming dynasty, you can see they are not acting like traditional Chinese emperors. They are sending emissaries over land, maritime, so they are still very much interested in world recognition, much more outward looking than the later Ming, who are closed and isolationist, right? So I argue there, working from recent histories of the early Ming, that the early Ming are also very much part of this model, and the competition between the Timurid and the early Ming creates another world order, maybe similar to the Cold War order that we had in the 20th century. Then the next chapter comes to the 16th century. The next two chapters are about the 16th century. And they're really centered on a story that involves a competition between the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, and to some extent the Uzbeks, although I don't talk about them as much. These are, again, great houses, and sometimes they're called, Islamic empires. But my argument here is that it's a bit misleading to call them Islamic empires. Of course, by this point, the Islam was a factor, but they still were acting in many ways like Chinggisid sovereigns. They were interested in world empire. Again, the emperor, think of, from I'm sure you've studied like Akbar and so, right, this is again a person who's not accountable really to anybody, right? Much more powerful than a ruler is supposed to be in according to earlier Islamic precepts, right? So this is a moment of universal empire competition, and that competition is really centered in the space between the Ottomans and the Mughals, and historical accounts that tell the story of this period by focusing on Europe are really missing where the action was in the 16th century. In the 16th century, if you were born in the 16th century, you had one in, I think, 3 chance of being a subject to one of these empires. And then, another 1 in 3, the Ming. So like Europe is really, and much of the world's economy was controlled by, again, these houses, and they're the ones who are expanding. And Europe comes into the story. I talk about Europe also, and I say the Habsburgs were actually competing with these houses, especially the Ottomans. And a lot of Habsburg behavior, like what is happening in Europe, is actually a direct result of their emulation and their competition with these Asian, Eurasian great houses. And I also discuss Russia and the ways Moscow was influenced, both previously also and in this period, by these Chingizid sovereignty and empire building, order building norms. Again, I'm happy to talk more about that period if anybody's particularly interested. So the kinds of similarities that I trace across these empires and these world orders, I already discussed, centralization, universal sovereignty, conquest, the importance of these factors. There are a number of secondary institutions that always went hand in hand with this particular understanding of sovereignty and interest in astronomy. So you will see, if you've been to Samarkand and so on, good examples, right? Observatories, tanistry, which is a mode of succession where it's not the eldest son who inherits, but male members of the ruling family are eligible, and they fight it. They fight amongst themselves, and that's a practice the Mongols had, and you can see it with the successor houses too. Again, maybe you'll know about the Mughal practice as well. And hunting, interest in hunting, generally relaxed attitude towards cultural difference or different types of cultural practice. This is a general feature, or I think, of Chingizid sovereignty, but in hybrid models, when there's been conversion to Islam and so on, sometimes it's not there. There are particular rulers who are intolerant, but the general mode is one of tolerance, not because they appreciated difference, but because the ruler sees themselves so above everybody else. It's like they don't care. It's like, people are like cattle or ants to them, so they don't care what the people do. It's not because they're nice people who appreciate difference. It's because they don't meddle, because it's kind of beneath them to police these types of things. And and then a promotion of trade. So they again, we can discuss this, but starting with the Mongol Empire, there is the old Silk Road, what's called the Silk Road, like those trade routes are reasserted. They are supported There's the postal system, like the horse. You can change horses every 25 miles. Again, like also the maritime trade. So what they inherit from previous periods, they actually build up and they invest in trade. And you see that interest and promotion of trade in subsequent houses influenced by this model as well. Happy to talk more about any of this. But coming back to international relations, what I'm doing in this book as an international relations scholar is to complement, replace and complement, I mean, to some degree challenge, but also to complement the traditional Eurocentric narrative that only looks at 17th century onwards with the narrative that brings in Asia and Eurasia and uses that historical material to think through some of the bigger debates of our time. Again, there's much more out there that I don't discuss, and others should write about. So what is the benefit of this? What do we get out of this? Many, I mean, you could use, once you have the historical material, you can use it to think through any issue, really. But one of the things I'm interested in the book is this question of decline, which is something that international relations scholars think a lot about. But in general, this issue of decline has been debated as something that only happens to great powers. So, people debate, for instance, the decline of the US, which is fine. Of course, great powers rise and decline. But I think we've missed other types of decline because if you only study European history from 17th century onwards, the inevitable conclusion is the backdrop, the order doesn't really change that much. That's pretty much constant. And it's only the identities of great powers that change, from Great Britain to the US and Soviet Union, etc. Right? But if you take a longer view of history, if you study, Asian, Eurasian history, then you can see that it's not just about great powers decline, but orders themselves can decline and fragment. That's something that international relations had not considered until recently, until we entered this period where everybody's discussing the crisis of the liberal international order or the rules-based order. But it had not occurred to people that this could happen. The assumption was that the international order just keeps expanding, and people talked about end of history, right? They thought this was it. Once it becomes global, that's end of history. And I think the lesson from the history I'm looking at is very clearly there were these orders, they fragmented, and they were forgotten. I mean, so that is definitely something the field should consider. And then there is another level that I discuss in the book. I call that ecumene. What I mean by that is something like civilization, some deep norms and understandings that we take so much for granted that we think they will never change. So a good example of that from our time is the nation state. We think, because we are born into nation states and so much of our identity, we have ID cards. When somebody asks us, who are you? Like one of the first things we'll say is, I'm from X place. We think that will never change. But for much of history, people didn't think of themselves as belonging to nations. Like, they organized themselves differently. So because it hasn't existed previously, it's possible that it won't exist in the future. So that's what I mean by ecumene, like these deep norms we take for granted. And I think, again, studying Eurasian history shows us there were some very deep norms people took for granted that have completely gone away. So, for instance, for the time period I'm looking at, a connection to the family of Genghis Khan was so valuable. If you wanted to be a ruler, if you could claim some kind of connection, even the Byzantine Empire like sent their daughters to marry into this. I mean, such was the charisma of of this family. It was like, and it's again kind of gone away. Or the importance of conquering China, etc. Right. So there are certain norms that everybody is kind of oriented towards that can also decline and disappear. So how does that happen? In the book, I also discuss periods of crisis. The orders that I discuss are punctuated, or like their ends are associated with periods of crisis. According to historians, most famously, maybe some of you will have heard, the general crisis of the 17th century, as it is called. I mean, again, we can debate what do we mean by crisis, what qualifies as a crisis. All I can say is that there are moments where there are too many things going wrong, right? It's not just, if you study just the national history, you'll say, oh, this ruler made the wrong kind of choices or something. That's how it will be explained what happened. But if you take the global view, there are a lot of things happening at the same time that are creating problems, like so structural pressures. I mean, this is what I really mean. The example is, now many historians think 17th century was a period of severe climate change. The world had become cooler in the northern hemisphere. And that had all sorts of, knock-on effects, crop shortages, population failures, wars. So that we have political instability throughout much of Eurasia. Interestingly, the Mughals don't have much of a problem because probably it's a bit warmer to the south. But I mean, one of the arguments that I'm making is that what causes orders to decline or fragment, it's not necessarily the decisions of particular rulers or empires, but really systemic pressures that are pulling at the seams of the order in many different directions, whether it's climate change or some kind of financial issue, or maybe a combination of things. Again, that has obviously application for 21st century, because many people argue that we are now again in a period of general crisis, like too many things happening at the same time, and the great degree of unpredictability and volatility in the system. So what does that mean about our modern international order? One final thought with more present-day implications. I also have an epilogue in the book called Uses and Abuses of Macrohistory. Am I a Eurasianist? For those who don't know, although I assume you know since you're interested in the work of this foundation, Eurasianism is it's a political movement with 19th century roots. It has echoes in Turkey, Russia. I mean, I think originally. So when I say, am I a Eurasianist? That's the Eurasianism, like Unified Eurasia project that I'm referring to. And I'm not, so this is not a political project in the book. At the same time, I think it's valuable for those of us, who are trying to find antidotes to Eurocentrism in the social sciences. It's important for us to recover these alternative histories. And also, I think it's important as, it has present-day political implications, because, again, we have, it's not just Eurocentrism that's a problem, but across Asia, Eurasia, we have, politicians, again, who emphasize differences and want to divide rather than create connections, right? So I think remembering the ways we are connected and we have shared histories is valuable as kind of a defense against that type of politics. And I think for international relations as a discipline, it's important to recover these bigger macro histories because that's the only way to think about the present in a balanced, fair, healthy way. I have a spin-off article that came out at the end of last year that looks at some of the present-day politics around remembering or recovering this history. And obviously, there are sensitivities. It's come up a lot around Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are sensitive dynamics, in China, in India, and so on. People have issues with which we can discuss in the Q&A as well. I'm eager to hear what you make of it. Just again to underline the fact that I'm not advocating or apologizing for this history, but I think it's important to remember the way it's shaped the continent. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ayse Zarakol, for an excellent speech on today's theme, the topic Eurasia, history, geopolitics, and international relations. As you've highlighted the complex dynamics and interconnectedness of the Eurasian region, it is clear that a deep understanding of its history, geopolitics, and international relations is crucial for any analysis or policy making in this area. The Mongol Empire, as you mentioned, the Silk Road, and the Great Game, these three are just a few examples of the historical events and the geopolitical strategies that have shaped Eurasia's importance on the global stage. And you mentioned about Ibn Battuta. So there's a quote by him: "Traveling makes one modest, and you see what a tiny place you occupy in the world." This quote completely resonates strongly in this context, as it reminds us of the vastness and significance of Eurasia in shaping the global landscape. As you mentioned about, and you focused on the world order, though the world order has always been intricately tied up to the power struggles and alliances with Eurasia, with several major world actors vying for influence and control. So clearly evident that the study of Eurasia from a historical, geopolitical, and international relations context holds immense value in comprehending the dynamics of global power and shaping effective policies for the future. Thank you so much, and let's take some questions now. How have shifts in economic, military, and technological capabilities played a role in the decline of past great power? As you mentioned, that there are certain chapters in the book, and you have highlighted the shifts, how there's a decline, there are certain shifts which kept happening. So what do you think? There is a certain pattern of these things. So do these patterns hold relevance even today, according to you?
Yes. One of the interesting things I realized, my first book is about the 19th century, and it's about stigmatization of non-European countries, but also in the internalization of that, by elites outside of Europe, this idea of civilizational decline or backwardness, which was main argument coming from Europe about Asia. So, I mean, part of my journey into this book was like trying to understand why this was such a commonly shared feeling across Asia that there was a decline. And when you look at, material facts, it's odd because the material decline of Asia doesn't happen until really 18th, 19th century. I mean, so I subscribe to the pro-Asia side of the Great Divergence debate. Economically, Asia is doing pretty okay until the 19th century. So from the 17th century, like the Ottomans recover from that crisis, Russia expands, the Ming are replaced by the Qing expand. I mean, the Mughal story is a bit different, but even with the decline of the Mughals, India economically, like the subcontinent, I mean, it's a very prosperous place, right? Which is part of the reason why the British Empire, gets to where it does. So there is no economic material decline. That happens much later. So the real story is one of, I argue, is one of social decline or perceptual decline. I think the loss of a shared order, like Asia, Eurasia as a shared space, the turning inward that happens from 17th century onwards, that creates the sense of decline and loss, even though, economically, materially, there isn't a real decline. So I think to take that lesson to the present, it is possible, like, for instance, the United States to keep doing economically okay, materially okay, militarily okay, but still have this sense of decline or having lost something because it's no longer ordering the world. It's no longer imposing its will on the world. In fact, I think we're seeing indicators of that. I mean, if you measure, if you just, like, as international relations scholars like to do, if you just look at material indicators, the US is fine. Europe, institutions of Europe, they're relatively robust. So on paper, there isn't really any, like, there's no reason why there should be all these debates about decline of the liberal international, the rules-based order, and so on. But I think there is that sense of decline because there is a fragmentation of the social order. There is a decrease of social influence. There is a decline of the general order rather than the domestic economic or technological indicators. So I think separating those things is one of the lessons you get from history.
Thank you so much, Professor Zarakol. Next question. The Timurids also. So to what extent did the legacies of the Chinggisids and the Timurids persist in the governance, the cultural developments, and the international relations of successor states and neighboring regions in Eurasia?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, so if you're interested in this question, I recommend that you read the book because this is all what the book is about. So the clearest trajectory of influence is from the Chinggisids to the Timurids, and then from the Timurids to the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, and the Uzbeks. From the Ottomans, you go to also the Habsburgs. Like, so that's one lineage. The Chinggisids also have, via Golden Horde, which is the bit of the Mongol Empire that survives the longest, they very directly influence Moscow. And, of course, then there is the East Asian trajectory, which is, the Yuan, early Ming. And then that lineage kind of fades away because the institutions, I would say, of China are relatively strong, so they reassert themselves, Neo-Confucianism, etc., and they check that power of the emperor from mid 15th century onwards. Although there are moments, even in later Ming, where some emperors try to resurrect that older model, but then it comes back via the Qing, in the middle of the 17th century. I don't get into that, but the Qing are also very influenced by, the Chinggisid Mongol model being, so throughout the space, you see the influences for centuries. As I said, even in places that were not directly conquered, you still have the influences because there's there's intellectual interchange, or people moving from this space to the Delhi Sultanate and so on, right? So you see it everywhere. I'm not saying it always dominates. It's not, again, there are particular rulers that are more devout, Muslim rulers than, so when there is a contradiction, right, between being a proper Muslim and claiming that you have all the power yourself as a ruler, because in Islam, Allah is supposed to be sovereign. You cannot be, you're supposed to be Allah's subject. Even the caliph is like Allah's subject, right? So there is always a tension and a contradiction between the Chinggisid model and Islam, where they have converted. But that's definitely one of the things that is very much influencing these ruling families from 13th century, I would say, to 17th century, and maybe in some places beyond that. Did that answer the question, or was it?
Yeah.
Is there? Yeah. Okay.
Question. Thank you so much. Coming to the next question. As you talked about Eurasia in general, but there is also the prominence of Central Asia when we talk about Eurasia. So how does the prominence of Central Asia within the world economy and the geostrategy plan and its significance in geopolitical power struggles?
Concept of what? I'm sorry, I missed it. Concept of
the concept of heartland. There's a big concept of heartland.
Yes.
Yeah. So how does the prominence of Central Asia within this world economy and this concept, how it it aligns, and also its significance in the geopolitical power struggles?
Yes. Yeah, so it's that's an excellent question. I mean, that's also like an eye-opening thing when you study this period. I mean, the centrality of Central Asia or Inner Asia to world economic activity is enormous. And in fact, I mean, the trade routes are maintained by people who control, Inner Asia. I mean, of course, there's a maritime route as well from China, that goes all the way via India to, West Africa. So, but the inner route is very important, and that's why I think it's nowadays the Silk Road, it's very much like China's project, the Belt and Road Initiative, etc. And there is almost a claim that this was the older route was Chinese. And of course, China was very important as kind of the manufacturer of things that were desirable in other parts of the world. But without Inner Asia, without Central Asia, the trade would just not have existed. So it was actually the maintenance of those routes that was really central to world's economy. It wasn't just about manufacturing, it was about the supply chain. Like, even as it is today, the supply chain is what matters and what makes I'm using the word supply chain like tongue in cheek, but exactly that, right? It's that is what connected the world. It was Central Asia that connected the world, and I think people across Asia should realize that this is not owned by China. China is just one leg in a much bigger kind of connectivity.
Thank you so much, Professor Zarakol. So when we talk about empires, so this is a question which everybody wants to know the answer of the everybody wants to know the answer of this question, that why is it a common phenomena that every empire must eventually decline and collapse?
Hmm. Um, yeah, well, that's a big and deep question. I guess everything has kind of like a lifespan. I mean, in the case of, I'll tell you about the empires that I looked at. As I said, that they ran into legitimation problems because you cannot keep expanding. I mean, so this empire, the empires I'm looking at, the idea that they had to be world empires was built into the logic of the thing from the beginning. So they are always trying to expand, but they cannot expand because sometimes there's no place to expand. Other times you run into others who are also trying to expand, or there are crises, climate change or something, that you cannot feed your troops and whatnot. So there are limits on expansion, and when that happened, they tried to find alternative ways of legitimating their rule. So that's why, as I said, they convert, they use symbols of Islam, or maybe Hinduism, or like you're right, taking local symbols of justifying or legitimating rule, and then that the more, I mean, you can buy time doing that, but that introduces, of course, contradictions to and ways that you can be pressured, or you can create resentments. So I think those were, some of the pressure points, having to, I mean, in some ways, actually, the empires I'm looking at were quite resilient because they were so pragmatic about, taking on different modes of legitimation. So they survived. So, for instance, the Ottomans, they survive as a ruling family for almost 600 years, which is quite a feat. But eventually their time comes. I mean, yeah, so those are some reflections, but I'll have to think about the question, like, is this a rule of history? It seems that way. I mean, we cannot think of an exception to the rule. Why does it happen? Yeah, great question.
Thank you so much. Coming to the next question. So, as you talked about the Safavid, the Ottoman, and the Mughal Empire, so how do contemporary states in the region, once ruled by these empires, such as Turkey, Iran, and India, draw upon their historical legacies in shaping their modern national identities and foreign policies?
I think there's a complicated, I mean, it's not the same relationship in each context. I know, within, I mean, you will know better than I do, but I know, the Mughal stuff is controversial in India. And maybe, I mean, there are legitimate debates to be had about this stuff, because if British Empire is controversial, like, why shouldn't the Mughals be, etc. I mean, I don't know that context as well. I know also in the Turkish key very much owns like the Ottoman Empire and considers itself a successor state to that. But the Mongol influence on Ottoman Empire is very much downplayed. So what has happened in that specific example that I'm more familiar with is that's been almost entirely omitted from Turkish historiography. So most Turks do not know that the early Ottomans were vassals of the Ilkhanate, and they paid tribute. So, for instance, I'm starting from that, or influence of the Mongols, lawmaking notions, etc. So the way that I tell the history would not be familiar to most Turkish readers, and that's not actually like a new development. So after the Ottomans were defeated by Timur in 1402, there was an interregnum period. The Ottoman Sultan was killed, and there were 11 years without a ruler, and then they managed to consolidate themselves. So that's sometimes called the real beginning of the Ottoman Empire, 1413. And after that, in the 15th century, they engaged in revisionist history. They went back and excised discussions of Mongols and so on, and like Timur and anything like that from discussions of early Ottoman stuff. So what we do today, like trying to erase bits of history that we don't like or we find embarrassing or unflattering, that was happening back in the day as well. What I will say in general is, without advocating or apologizing for empire builders, because empire building is a violent, coercive process, regardless of who does it. I think it is important for people across Eurasia to, I'm not saying they should remember the Mongols fondly, but they should remember that there was a moment where our ancestors were dealing with the same forces, same institutions. Like we have shared experiences that go centuries back. It's the connections between Turkey, India, or India, China, China, Russia. These are not new connections. They have such long histories, for better or worse. That's what needs to be, I think, remembered and emphasized. If I was writing history textbooks, that's what I would emphasize.
Thank you so much, Professor Zarakol. Coming to the next question. So, could the establishment of a Eurasian international relations study contribute to enhancing the mutual trust and diminishing the conflict within the region? If you think so, what ways do you think can contribute or can answer this?
Yeah, I think I was getting at that in my previous answer. I do think that would be valuable, and I think it starts with, again, emphasizing that the histories of connection go back much further than people think. It's not like 20th century that these connections were forged. In fact, Asia was connected as a space much longer than Europe was.
Thank you so much. As you mentioned about ecumene, so how has the globalization influenced the concept of ecumene, and how does it shape the analysis of international relations, including the issues like which are related to trade, migration, and cultural exchange?
For us, I would say we all kind of share an ecumene, whether you call that modern or postmodern or something. There are very few parts of the world untouched by that, and even like remote islands, right? What they say, that white plastic chairs like everywhere. That's kind of the. Again, I'm kind of joking, like the dumpling, but it is, it is something that we've all been affected by. What was the second part of the question?
So as I told you about the
Yes.
how did it shape? How
does
did it
change?
shape actually? Yeah, in terms
Yes.
of trade, migration, and cultural exchange.
Yeah, again, that's a big question. I would say there are things that we take for granted about this world that then limits our imagination about what's possible in terms of trade or migration or etc. Right? So what I call the ecumene, like the deep norms of how the world is organized, underwrite that. And if something happens, like if we go through a period of prolonged crisis or disconnectivity, then the ecumene itself may change, may shift. And that has happened before. So I'm avoiding the question a little bit because it's a very big question, but So we have to think about, what are we taking for granted in this world that we think is natural and unchanging, but could change. That's how I would get at that question.
Thank you so much. Next question. What major epistemological challenges do you think are there when one tries to analyze the distant past, that is before the modern era, particularly in the East, in terms of modern IR concepts, as you have done?
Yeah. There are a number of challenges, some of which I discuss in the book. There is, of course, there are challenges with record keeping and primary sources, what's available. Of course, then I'm not a historian myself, so I have to rely on the works of historians who worked with these, many of which were not accessible until recently. So part of the reason why there's been all this stuff about the Mongols in the last decade is because things that were not available, like documents, became available after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and historians have been making their way through that. And only now we're starting to realize that our previous notions were quite simplistic and maybe wrong, and then that is, gradually making its way across social sciences. So that's one challenge. Then of course there are always issues with translation. And that, I think, gets to the second part of the question. So translation of concepts. And, the Mongols, for instance, never called themselves empire. It was the Mongol Yeke Ulus. Ulus is a word today is used for nation. But we translate as an empire. Of course, they didn't consider themselves a nation either. So, but, then there are these issues of, are we imposing something on that time period that is contrary to their own self-understanding? And then there is the issue of, so for instance, the concept of sovereignty. It's very much associated with European history. The claim is Europeans invented sovereignty, the concept of sovereignty. And in the book, what I'm saying is no, there is a particular understanding of sovereignty that emerged from Europe, which is the nation state model. But there were other understandings of sovereignty in other time periods. So I'm saying I'm refusing to cede this concept to Europe. It's such a foundational concept. You cannot own it. I'm taking it, and then I'm going to use it in other places. I'm going to redefine it a bit. And I get, a lot of pushback from European scholars saying, "Oh, why can't you use another word?" And I don't want to, but at the same time, again, it's a challenge. So I discuss in the book some of the choices I made and why I made them. So you just have to, I think, when you encounter issues like this, you have to be honest with the reader as to what the issues are, and then why you have decided to proceed the way you have. And that's the best we can do.
Thank you so much for your answer. I understand the challenges with sources and translation. I agree with you that the modern concepts that are more Eurocentric would be difficult to apply or fit in. Of course, you did do that pretty well. I also want to ask you more on the terms of the theorizing theory in in terms of theory, like say theory testing. If you can put some emphasis on that also.
Yeah, I'm not a positivist. I'm not anti-positivist, but I'm not. So I don't approach the material like, here I have a theory, I will now test it. Instead, I try to do it almost like conversationally, like in conversation with the historical material. So so what I do is more like conceptual work. Here are my concepts. I typologize. Here are the possible forms this thing can take, and then using that to work through the historical material. But then coming back at the end of it, like, here are some of the things, like ways we can theorize now that we've taken this journey through history.
What I
So
meant
it's not
was
testing.
what I meant was how did you did you test the as your theory, and once you had developed the hypothesis, how does the falsification play out?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. That's not the language I would use for my work. That belongs to with a very particular segment of international relations that I'm not a part of. I mean, I would say so in terms of hypothesis. I mean, I guess I do had a hypothesis. So I was working with the Ottomans, and then I started reading that there were influences in 16th century Ottomans from the Timurids and the Mongols. And then I thought, well, if the Ottomans were influenced by the Mongols, which are like 3 centuries back, then the other parts of Asia that were conquered by the Mongols must have been influenced by them as well. So that was my starting hypothesis. And then I started reading the histories of these different regions, and I found historians arguing the same thing. And that kind of, I guess, in the language you're using, that kind of tested my theory, and then I found it to be corroborated, and then I put the big narrative together. But that was my starting point.
Thank you so much for answering my question. Coming back to the Chinggisid legacy, what do you think? To what extent does the Chinggisid legacy influence the contemporary international relations in the regions with Mongol historical connections, for example, Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the Eastern Europe?
Yeah, I mean, it is a fraught kind of question in the sense that, so a lot of people say, oh, Putin is acting this way because Russians are influenced by the Mongols or something. That you see this argument made. And I think it's problematic to blame the Mongols for, and in fact, people from present-day Mongolia I see on Twitter get really disturbed by this. They say, oh, this is racism. And so then, yes, in a sense, it is problematic because it makes it seem like, oh, like Russians are nice white Europeans, and they wouldn't be acting like this if they hadn't been tainted by like Asians or something, which is an odd claim to make also because European empires have been so expansionist and devastating. So it's not like you need to go to Asia to find, violent empire builders. So that's, I don't agree with that. At the same time, it is true that within the political repertoire of centralized imperial rule, it even before the Mongols, but definitely with the Mongols, and I think Europe was politically fragmented for much longer. There were many. It's a smaller space with many more ruling houses, very small kingdoms, right? It's like that means that there were a lot of aristocrats and so on who had a degree of agency and power, which kept centralization in check. Whereas in Asia, you have these larger empires. You don't have, you have very strong ruling houses throughout many different time periods, and then you have the ruled, like the governed people, many of them. But there's the strata in between, like the aristocrats and so on. They're not as present or as in proportion to the general population, right? They're not. They're a small proportion compared to Europe. So I think that means in Asia, and I include Russia in this, there is a tendency towards political centralization because it's in the historical legacy, it's in the political repertoire, but that doesn't mean that there are no other political outcomes possible. I think actually the Indian subcontinent is a kind of an exception to this, because I think the history of the Indian subcontinent looks much more like Europe until the Mughal conquest than other parts of Asia. I mean, there are parts of Asia that are exceptions to this. Anyway, so just because something is in the political repertoire doesn't mean we have to be fatalistic and accept that this is the only possible outcome. But we need to be aware that there is that tendency. If I have, like, let's say if I have a tendency to, for genetic reasons, I have tendency to gain weight, then I exercise more, right? So like it's not predetermined. It just means there is a tendency towards this.
Thank you so much. Also, can you talk a bit about the legacies of Mongol rule in Eastern Europe, if any, because the Mongols were there? I mean, the Mongols reached till Hungary. Also,
yes.
Do you see Eastern Europe as a space in between Asia and Europe because of its shared history, like exposure to Asian rulers and the houses? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the legacies are there. I mean, they reached there, they didn't rule for very long, but I would say what we call Eastern Europe now was much more a part of the world orders that I discuss from 13th century to the 17th century than they were, oriented the other way. And yes, for that reason, I do think of it as a space. Of course, now, like in present day discourse, they make a big deal out of, they don't even like the word Eastern Europe. Everybody calls themselves Central Europe. So again, this legacy is very much downplayed, but those connections could be emphasized rather than de-emphasized. And I don't know, who knows, maybe at a time when Asia is ascendant, we'll see Eastern Europe re-emphasizing their connections with Asia rather than the other way around. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Ayse Zarakol, for being here today at the Tillotoma Foundation and for sharing your great analysis and insights on today's theme, Eurasia, history, geopolitics, and international relations. We had a wide discussion, I would say, on the Mongol Empire and its impact on Eurasian history, the role of the geopolitical dynamics, as well as the complexities of identity and ontological insecurity faced by latecomers to the Eurocentric international society. The rise and decline of empires, the formation of economic networks, and the interplay between the geopolitical factors have played crucial roles in shaping Eurasian history and its international relations. Eurasia continues to be a region of great significance and strategic importance in the global arena, with its dynamic interaction between the far west and the far east, serving as the center of gravity for modern world history. Thank you once again, Professor Ayse Zarakol. I look forward to seeing you again soon with another interesting topic of discussion and our continued collaboration. Thank you once again. I know there's a morning there, so I hope you have a great day. And to our audience, I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.